This episode of The Shift is sponsored by LinkedIn. As a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the ad space can be. Well, it's time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you. That's LinkedIn Ads, the platform where you can cut through the noise by precisely reaching the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Target your ideal audience by job title, industry, company, and more. Stand out with LinkedIn Ads and start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. LinkedIn Ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. You'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers, 1 billion members, and 10 million C-level executives. You'll be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools that are built specifically for B2B. In technology, LinkedIn generated 2 to 5 times higher return on ad spend than other social media platforms. And you'll work with a partner who respects the B2B world that you operate in. 79% of B2B content marketers said LinkedIn produces the best results for paid media. Throughout my career on magazines, digital media, and now podcasts, LinkedIn has been invaluable. It's given me direct access to people and ideas that have helped shape the Shift podcast and newsletter and seen it grow into the thriving hub for midlife women that it is today. Stand out with LinkedIn Ads and start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/theshift to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/theshift. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be. Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is Bella Mackie. Until her mid-30s, Bella was a journalist. Then she wrote a book called Jog On, and her trajectory changed dramatically. Ostensibly a book about running, Jog On was actually a soul-bearing account of Bella's battle with anxiety, OCD, and depression. It was one of a wave of books that blended memoir with motivation, and it was a big and unexpected hit. Then a couple of years ago, she wrote the brilliantly titled How to Kill Your Family. TikTok fell on it. Cue 47 weeks in the top 10 and a Netflix series. Not jealous at all. Now she's back with the equally twisted What a Way to Go, in which more highly unlikable people get their comeuppance. Some of them, anyway. Truly, Bella can come up with ways to kill a loved one you hadn't even dreamed of.
There's no top trumps with mental illness, but I do think it's one of the most hard to kind of get a lid on in a way, because it shifts all the time, and sometimes you're not aware that something that's happening is part of your OCD, and so it can take months or years, or sometimes you look back and you go, oh right, that was OCD, that wasn't just me.
Bella joined me to talk about being child-free and building your own roadmap to aging without kids in the equation. We also discussed her childhood obsession with true crime, why there's not a top trumps of mental health, and why she still has a long way to go to fight her way out of the good girl box. I was trying to remember when we last spoke, because I remember I interviewed you, didn't I, at Cheltenham for Jog On?
Yes. Yeah. I think that was the last time we spoke.
About 5
book stuff.
years ago.
I think it was early 2020, or maybe it was 2019. Everything pre-pandemic is quite difficult.
It was pre-pandemic, but yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Jog On and exercise and mental health and all that before we go. And before we could progress to murder and aging and rage. It's just all in a day's work. What was it that made you think I need to write this down when you wrote Jog On?
Do you know what? I didn't think I needed to write it down. I wrote a really brief article about running and mental health, like 600 words about how I liked running. And then someone from HarperCollins emailed me and said, have you thought about writing a book? And I thought it was like a troll. I thought it wasn't a real guy. And I couldn't find anything about him online. And so I thought, oh, right, someone is trolling me and that's really mean. And I sort of felt stupid. So I didn't reply to him. And then he emailed again about 3 weeks later and said, have you thought about this? And eventually I replied, and he said, can I take you for lunch? So we went for lunch, and he was real. And he said, I've been trying to find a book about running, and, I think this might be it. And I thought, oh, okay. And I wasn't sure there was enough there. He gave me this really good piece of advice. He said, your life is not interesting enough for it just to be a memoir. And I thought, okay, that's good, but it was good because I was 30, what was I, 32, 33. So actually he was completely right. And the only really interesting thing that had happened was that my husband had left me. So it wasn't, there wasn't quite enough for a book. So that was interesting. It was helpful for me because it meant that I could go into kind of the statistics and the facts, and I interviewed lots of other people for it. And so I guess it was during the process of writing that I thought, oh, this is helpful for me. This is useful for me to be writing this all down. And then again, it wasn't until it came out that I realized that it was also useful for other people. I hoped it would be, but you don't know with a book whether anyone's going to read it. And then it came out, and suddenly people were messaging me kind of constantly saying, oh my God, this is who I am. I can't believe someone's written this down. And so that was a real surprise. But yeah, it wasn't sort of something that I thought I had to do. It just sort of happened. And then I understood the value of it afterwards, I guess, which is what happens a lot for me.
Yeah. When did it become a book about, because you could look at it two ways, can't you? Obviously it's about the connection between exercise and mental health, but it almost, and when I read it, I remember thinking it was almost a book that was more about mental health than running, even though it was about running.
Yeah. And I think that was important because I think the way I approach running is always from that perspective of mental health. I've never done a marathon. I've never done a half marathon. I've never done a race. I've never, all these things that people quite often fall into when they start running, and they get obsessed with it, and they want to, do a personal best time and all of those kind of things. Yeah. I never wanted to do any of it. Yeah, exactly. And I read a lot of running books before I even sat down to write Jog On. And a lot of them are by men. Mostly the running books in the field are by men, and they are quite focused on time and speed and fitness and, what you can do with your ankles in order to make you a better runner. They're quite sort of, they're interesting, but it's just not the book that I wanted to write because that wasn't my experience of it.
They're goal-oriented.
Exactly. Very goal-oriented. How long can you run? What's the longest you can run for? What's the fastest you can run? What's the highest mountain you can run? A lot of competitiveness. And I felt like if I made my running competitive, even just with myself, I would stop liking it. So then I read a lot of books by women runners. So there's kind of Alexandra Hemsley and Bryony Gordon and lots of books like that, which are kind of about the other element of running, which is kind of the more holistic element about what it makes you feel like. And so I was trying to marry those two things a little bit about kind of why it's good for you, why it was good for me. But I was trying to appeal to the non-runner, not to the runner. And I think a lot of those running books are appealing to the already established runner. And I was trying to be an advocate, like a shill, if you like, for big running. I was like an unpaid ambassador for the sport. I was like, come on, get running. So yeah, that's kind of, and also the mental health element of it, I think is more interesting. I always think mental health is interesting. So yeah, I didn't want to write a kind of nerdy stats book, basically.
Yeah, because I think, I find I'm not a runner. And I find the fact that you, and in fact, Alex and Bryony as well, are not like classic runners. But I love that you haven't done a marathon, because I kind of feel like you watch someone say, oh, I'm going to take up running. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. And then next thing you know, they're running a half marathon and then they're running a marathon. And that instantly makes me feel like I would fail before I've started.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that if you sort of set up these big expectations and these big goals and you say, anyone can do it. And then it turns out this person's run 55 marathons and you think, can anyone do it? And I've stuck to that, and I think there's no shade to anyone that does run a marathon. If they start running, they want to run a marathon, that's great. But I just know if I started to do that, I've seen people do it. And normally what happens is they finish their training, they finish the marathon, and then they don't run again for 3 months or 6 months. They feel like I need a break from that. That was, that becomes, and also I have OCD. So I know I get obsessed with things. And I know that if I was marathon training and recording my times like that, it would become obsessive and narrow, and then you lose the love of it. So I'm quite wary about that for myself. It doesn't mean other people can't, but I'm very much an amateur runner, which is why it's called Jog On, not Run On.
Yeah, not Sprint On. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
When did you first become aware you had OCD?
Well, my earliest memory of it is when I was a kid, but obviously I didn't have the language to know what that was. So when I got diagnosed, it was when I went to see a psychiatrist because I was convinced that I was like quote unquote mad. You know, I, again, didn't have the language for it, but I thought I was schizophrenic. And I kept saying to my parents, I'm schizophrenic. You need to make me go to a hospital. And they were saying, you're not schizophrenic. And I was saying, I am. So I went to see a psychiatrist and I explained everything that I was thinking. And she said, oh no, you're not schizophrenic. You have OCD. And I thought,
how old
OCD
were you then? Sorry.
I think I was 18, 19, which is kind of classic time to be diagnosed with OCD and anxiety. And I thought OCD was just, tidying. I thought that's what OCD was. And I'm not that tidy.
that kind of cliche of like lining up the Diet Coke cans in the fridge so they all face the same way.
Yeah. And so I was kind of surprised. I thought, oh, that's odd. And then the more I learned about OCD and the more research I did and still do, and you find that it's like this incredibly odd illness that can kind of shapeshift and take on all these different forms. And there's sort of no two people that have the same OCD symptoms. And it's kind of, there's no top trumps with mental illness, but I do think it's one of the most hard to kind of get a lid on in a way, because it shifts all the time. And sometimes you're not aware that something that's happening is part of your OCD. And so it can take months or years, or sometimes you look back and you go, oh, right, that was OCD. That wasn't just me doing my thing. That was an obsessive compulsive thing. So even now that I kind of understand it better, I still get hoodwinked by it.
Because I think there's a misconception, isn't there, that you kind of find out that you've got a thing and then you somehow miraculously get better. I mean, how do you manage it? Does it come and go?
Yeah, I think when I first was diagnosed, they put me on medication, which helped a bit, but I didn't really do anything else. And then I had some therapy in my 20s, but I was very unhappy in my 20s, like really, really unhappy, just living quite small. And the OCD was kind of controlling everything that I did and dictating everything. And then I started running, which was amazing for it, because OCD is all about kind of control and limiting everything, and anxiety. And running was this way for me of like breaking out of that and living a bigger life and showing my brain that not everything was scary and dangerous. So it was a really amazing springboard, and that was fantastic. And now I'm taking different meds, and I had like a sort of 6 months of not ERP, EMDR.
EMDR, yeah. I've had that, yeah.
Yeah, which I found really interesting and kind of helpful. But I think the problem was that I was so sad and anxious after the pandemic that I sort of thought it might fix everything. And I think that's the thing that's so interesting, is that I'm 41 and I know there's no fix for it. And yet I'm still looking for fixes. I'm still, if I see a social media post that says, I cured my anxiety of this, I'll eye roll, but I'll also think, oh, maybe it did cure your anxiety, maybe it didn't cure my anxiety, and that's absurd, because I know better than that. I wrote a whole book about how nothing can cure this. But yeah, I think I still always have an eye on something, thinking, will that work? Will this work? So, and I think you can become obsessed with that as well, instead of just trying to live and noting it, you're sort of still thinking, how bad is it today? Is it terrible today? Or is this something else? It's kind of an exhausting quagmire sometimes. So yeah, I deal with it in different ways at different points.
It's like, I think it's kind of in a way back to the goal-oriented thing though, isn't it? Because I remember when I went to a therapist, I was like, literally, right, how long? Am I going to be in and out of here in 6 weeks? And she's like, as long as it takes. Like, no, that's not satisfactory. I need an end point and I need a goal. And she was just like, eye roll. And you could tell that she'd heard that a million times.
Yeah, well, that's the terrible thing about mental health, isn't it? Is that we know so little about the brain, and we know so little about these illnesses and about other things, just like sadness or worry. We don't have quick fixes to that, and that obviously humans like certainty and we like answers, and so to not have those things is very unstabilizing. So you go to see a professional and you think the professional is going to say, "Aha, I have the answer for you," and actually even the professional says, "Well, I don't know. We'll see what happens," and you think, "Oh God, I'm so adrift," So I think that can be really difficult, which again, hence why people are constantly looking for the other thing, the other quick fix, and yeah, there isn't one.
Damn. What impact, if any, did having a massive bestseller, because there's no other way to describe How to Kill Your Family, did that kind of kick your inner critic into touch a bit?
It came out in 2021, which was kind of still quite pandemic-y.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't doing promo really at all, except, a few online things. And it didn't kind of go wild until the paperback came out. So it was kind of slow, like successful, but slower. But no, I think because the pandemic made me so anxious, it set me back like 10 years worth of progress.
Oh, man.
That actually I just didn't enjoy any of it, and I felt like it shouldn't have done well. I felt like the other shoe was going to drop. I felt like I couldn't write another one, and it's terrible because you think that's such an ungrateful answer, isn't it? You think you should be so jumping for joy and over the moon, and of course, like there's an element of that, but mainly I just kind of felt more scared and anxious by the whole thing. Ridiculous, because what a wonderful thing for any writer to have, but yeah, it didn't feel good. But I think that was mainly just because I was feeling really anxious and unhappy at that point. I think maybe if it had come out at another time, I'd have been running around holding up banners that said, "I've sold 1 million copies, screw you." Maybe I'd have been unbearable. But in that moment, I was definitely it didn't make me feel better. And I thought it would. It's that thing, isn't it? That you think when you hit a goal, you think, right, I'm going to move to Edinburgh, or I'm going to write a bestseller, or I'm going to dye my hair. And you think, and then my life will be good. Then I've hit the kind of the point that I need to be at to be the perfect version of me. And then when you get there and you're like, oh, I still have all the same things. And it's one of those lessons that you have to keep learning, because you know that when you're 20, but there's still a part of us that thinks, if I can just get this, then everything will be fine. And and then it happens and you're annoyed.
Well, it's just like that classic thing, isn't it? It's like you say, whether you're doing a geographical or trying to lose a stone or whatever, you're still taking yourself with you. So ultimately, it's all still there.
Exactly. Yeah. And the way you respond to the thing is going to be predicated on who you are and what your worries are. So, I'm incredibly anxious and overthink everything. So my book doing well made me anxious and overthink everything. And if it hadn't done well, I assume it would have had the same effect.
It would have done, yeah. It would have been like, oh my God, I can't write another one. I can't follow that. Or, oh, well, I can't write another one because nobody wants to read what I write anyway. So
exactly.
It's lose-lose.
Yeah, there's no winning. Yeah, my husband's always like, how does this not make you want to kind of jump on the sofa like Tom Cruise with happiness? And I'm like, it's not my brain. It's not who I am. I can't, it's a shame. It's a real shame.
Is he really that? Is he as glass half full as he appears?
Yeah, I think he's not Pollyanna-ish. He's not kind of, and some people like that, it can be a bit insufferable where you're like, oh God, just, say something terrible for once. He's not like that. But he's just one of the life's optimists, and we'll see things, the same thing, and we'll just have completely different perspectives on it. So I'll say, but what if that lump on my wrist is cancer? And he'll say, well, it might be, but it's probably not. It's probably more likely that you just sprained it. And I'm thinking, how are you thinking that? How is that where you're getting from that? Clearly it must be the worst of all possibilities. And his head never goes there. And that's really nice. I think to be with someone who was like me would be a nightmare. Like, I think he's definitely got the worst end of the deal. But it's nice for me living with someone like that. I think, oh God, it's like living with like another species. I'm like, oh, how are you like that? Sometimes I'm just sort of confused, in awe, and confused. Yeah. But then, all my family are sort of optimists. I don't know where I came from. I came from my grandfather. That's what everyone tells me. I came from my grandfather, because everyone else is quite optimistic. It's just me sort of sitting in a corner worrying about everything. Chicken little.
Great. Yeah. What was it that was attractive to you about like going to the dark side, for want of a better way to put it? Because, Jog On was like, it was nonfiction. It was, for you, optimistic. It was,
Yeah. No, you're right.
And then you're literally like, I'm going to think of the most macabre ways I can to kill everyone close to me, not me, Grace, your character. Where did that come from? Was that latent in little Bella, or not latent?
Oh yeah. Like I think I am just quite dark. And as a kid, I read voraciously, but mostly what I read was, my parents were very lax about sort of censoring what I read. So I read, initially I read a lot of Agatha Christie's and stuff. I read a lot of point horror and point fiction, point thriller or whatever. And then I just, even as a kid, I got really into kind of the most dark thrillers that you could possibly find in the bookshop. And then when I was about 8, I got a my dad bought me a subscription to a true crime magazine. Do you remember you used to buy the magazine?
Yeah.
And then you'd get a ring binder. And so you'd have all the copies. Do you remember? Yeah.
That looked like books on the outside. Yeah.
Exactly. So I had a true crime subscription. And that was, the late 80s, 90s when, every front page of the tabloids was kind of, girl ripped ear from ear and, all of that kind of stuff. It was way worse than, in a way, we have social media now and true crimes everywhere, but in a way it was kind of sort of grimmer back then. And I was kind of dissecting all this information. I remember I knew everything about like Fred West when I was 8 or whatever. I mean, things like that you shouldn't know. So I think I've always been like that. And then my version of writing this was, I didn't want to traumatize anyone with kind of the really awful things that you find in fiction and true crime. I wanted to make it funny, but I've always been drawn to crime and, the dark side of everything. But I guess my version of that was to try and put a sort of funny spin on it so as not to kind of, I don't think I could write a serious crime book.
I mean, I think crime has changed a bit lately to the extent that actually if you watch, I can't remember what it was, but I remember starting to watch something on ITV and literally the first 5 minutes of it were this woman's body in a women's loo. And it was just like, it actually felt it jarred because that used to be the norm and it does feel like it's moved away from it a bit. But that kind of fetishization of serial killers and the men who kill as opposed to the women they kill.
Entirely correct. Because, I stopped reading crime fiction maybe in my late 20s and I don't watch any kind of true crime stuff. I don't listen to those kind of podcasts because it is always just a woman being murdered. And it starts with the woman being murdered in the most grotesque of ways. And then normally in fiction and non-fiction, there is kind of like, a slightly troubled male detective who, he's handsome, but he doesn't know it. Like he's wearing a leather jacket and then it's all about him, and then it's about the murderer, and the people that you're interested in are the murderer and maybe the detective, but you're not interested in the victim at all. And I got fed up of reading those books and those series. And so much of it is just about women who are dead. And so I think that's why I couldn't, and I know it has changed obviously, but there's still quite a lot of that. And especially with the true crime podcasts, which are quite often the victims are, conventionally attractive white women. And then, the hosts sort of enthralled by the murderer as if the murderer is someone special and interesting and clever. And did you read The Five by Hallie Rubenhold?
Yeah.
I think that was a real turning point of, she sort of, Jack the Ripper is so rarely mentioned. I don't actually think she says anything about him by name, and it's just about the victims. And you realize that they were these full-rounded women who weren't just sex workers, and I think that book was so much more interesting to me than someone writing a book about, a murderer who kills the women.
Yeah, it's I do think we are seeing a little bit of a shift. With Grace in How to Kill Your Family, was there, and I'm not saying for a moment that you wanted to kill your family, but she basically, one of the things I absolutely love about her, and I don't want to kill my family either, but she does do all the things that you might occasionally on a bad day think about. She literally behaves in a way women aren't allowed to behave.
Yeah, I think for me, that part is not to do with her family. That's to do exactly with what you say, is that she behaves in a way women aren't allowed to behave. She's angry, she's snarky, she's snobby and bitchy sometimes. She thinks, very uncharitable things about people. And she's so unapologetic about it. She doesn't feel bad. She just does what she wants, which in her case is murder. But, she just lives her life in a really authentic way, which kind of, she's oddly very unaffected by the way all women are brought up, which is to kind of be nice and apologetic and hold your tongue and mold yourself into whatever it is that society demands of you in that time and place. And she is curiously unaffected by all of that. And so it was such a nice role to write because, I got to live like that for a bit through her. And the thing that everyone always says to me if they get in touch about the book is, I feel weird how much I liked her, because it's always women reading it. And it's always women saying, are you supposed to like a serial killer? Oh God, I feel weird about this. But that's not the bit they like. They like that she's furious and angry and does what she wants and doesn't care.
And where are you on the spectrum of fighting your way out of your good girl box, not killing your family, obviously?
I think I am still very much in the box. even at 41, I think I'm still very much in the box. And it's not, people say, oh, you're like someone that's a people pleaser or whatever. And it's not even that. It's not that I want to please other people. It's just, I kind of want people to like me or not find me difficult. And I was in a jewelry shop the other day and they locked the door behind you. And there was a man in there who sort of started saying, oh, you're so beautiful. And, all the kind of stuff that some random strange man might say to you. And I just smiled and sort of said, thanks. And I thought when I was older that I wouldn't do that I'd say, can you sort of talk to me like that? That's gross. And I didn't. I was just like, thanks so much, like a kid again. And I also think there's something, this is a bigger issue and it's not necessarily about women, but I think there is something in this modern world, people who write or act or sing or dance, anyone that's got a bit of a profile, there's some kind of emphasis on those people to be likable and relatable in a way that maybe there wasn't 60 years ago. I don't think anyone thought Elvis or the Beatles had to be relatable. But I think there is now probably because of social media and you can access those people. So I think being aware of that, you think, I don't want people to find me controversial or difficult or ungrateful or all of those things because I want them to buy my books and I don't want them to not like me or say mean things to me online. So I think that's another element of it where you think you're still not doing all the things and saying all the things you'd like to do because you feel slightly hemmed in by that.
I mean, when I was researching you, that I Googled, and the very first thing it said about you, even before it said that you'd sold 1 million copies with your book, was like Greg James' wife. And it's like, is there an element, do you think, of that you feel like, because that is the first thing the internet says about you, you have to like behave, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess a little bit. I guess, you don't want to be the person that kind of smears your other half's reputation. Imagine if I went into, a restaurant and shouted at the waiter and clicked my fingers at someone and then forever Greg James was known for being married to some monster. Yeah, that's not something I want to do, by the way. Yeah, I guess there's a little bit of that where you think, Caesar's wife, again, it's not a great analogy, but, you think because he's so lovely and optimistic and nice and he speaks to the nation every day and stuff, I think people assume I will be like that. And I'm not. I'm actually, not only am I like an anxiety bull of, anxiety wool, but also, I'm really cynical and I'm really snarky and sarcastic, and I'm not like that. But I think probably I do feel like I have to be a bit more or a bit less like me and a bit more.
Yeah, you can't mess with his brand.
Yeah, I guess not even that. I guess it's just that stuff doesn't translate well online, which is where most people would see me, right? If I make a flippant joke or a dark joke or if I roll my eyes at something or call someone a cunt, that stuff doesn't land in the way that it would land if I was just saying it to you. And so, then if I do stuff like that, if I overshoot, sometimes I get messages being like, that's just, unacceptable. That was just so rude or whatever. And then I think, oh, so yeah, there's an element of kind of hemming myself in, not just because of him, but because, nothing lands on social media in the way that you think it will, or you hope it, not always anyway. So, yeah.
No, it's like humor doesn't travel really unless it's that's why everybody loves cat memes and, because it's almost got to be that straightforward. Like, here's a cat.
Although I will say,
thing.
I do think that like I don't actually know what generation they are. What's the sort of 20-year-old generation?
Are they still the Gen Zs?
Gen Zs, Gen Ys, whatever they are, with their youthful faces. Weirdly, they pop up on my TikTok a lot saying, like, making incredibly dark jokes and like things that I wouldn't dare say. And they feel slightly untethered from the kind of, and maybe it's because we all came of age in the early internet, the kind of, maybe it's a slight Wild West, of Tumblr and then Twitter and all of these kind of places. And maybe they didn't. And as a result, they seem more, especially the girls, they seem more like they don't care. Like they want to say what they want to say and they're just going to do it. And things that I would never have done at their age. They're lip syncing to their abusive ex-boyfriend's voicemails and sort of swearing and shaving their head if a man comments to say that they don't like short hair. I mean, they feel quite bold in a way that I didn't feel then and still don't feel now.
I was going to say, do you feel a bit bolder now you're older?
No, I don't. And I'm a coward in every single way. And I think, like, I was listening to your interview with Kathy Newman the other day and her saying that 50 feels amazing, to kind of, that she feels like she's sort of unshackled from those thoughts. But no, I don't feel like that. I feel more like I have to, be nice. And, I guess that does come with a certain level of recognition or book sales or whatever it is, that you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to, and you don't want to mess it up for your editor, and you don't want to mess it up for the publicist, and you don't want, so there are all these people that you think, oh God, if I did one thing wrong, not something monstrous, but just something that was seen as not very nice or not likable, then, I could mess it up for other people. So yeah, I'm still a complete baby, basically, about expressing my opinions.
Can I ask you a really nosy question, and you tell me to fuck off if you don't want to answer it? Yeah,
of course.
I was reading an interview that Greg did with Men's Health, and one of the things he was talking about was how you and he are thinking no on the children front and starting a family. I mean, I'm aware that I've mentioned Greg a couple of times, and I don't usually when I do the interview, and so I don't want to be annoying.
No,
but at the same time, he's the one who's been mouthing off. So when you search, it's like he says this comes up. But the reason I'm asking is because whenever I write anything about not having children, being child-free, childless, whatever you prefer, I always get an avalanche of response. And what people often say, women often say, is that they just feel like there's no roadmap for getting older if you're not a mother. And in What a Way to Go, you talk a lot about, it's just one of the themes, but there's a lot about the kind of sanctity of motherhood and the way that children represent success. How are you feeling about, your early 40s? There's still time if that's the thing you want to do, but how are you feeling about that kind of way forward?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I think about it all the time, and we talk about it all the time. And I think that's probably healthier than not talking about it. But I think it's difficult because it's one of those things where neither of us vehemently are against having kids, and neither of us are vehemently for them. So we're sort of both somewhere in the middle going, is this the right decision? I don't know. I think it is. Maybe it is. Is it okay? And so I think that's really difficult, because I think I envy people who know one way or another what they want, in anything in life. I envy people who know what they want to do with their careers and, all of those things. And so I think anything, especially, for the anxious mind, not having certainty on issues, I think is really difficult. And I'm constantly looking for signs one way or another for things. And yeah, that's no different. And I am now 41. So, it is a matter of time now, rather than, it's not one of those things where I can go, well, we'll just think about it for another 10 years. Because that's kind of what I've been doing, which is sitting on it thinking, well, at some point I'll make a decision one way or another, and it still hasn't happened. And I think, okay, well, maybe that means that the decision is no. And what does that look like for the rest of our lives? And I don't know what it looks like, because I don't remember growing up knowing lots of childless women. And the ones that I did know, I think there was something programmed in me to think, oh, it's such a shame we don't have a kid though. And I remember growing up, even as a kid, seeing celebrities and stuff and thinking, oh, it's so sad that she doesn't have a kid. Like, Jennifer Aniston in a magazine, or Kylie Minogue, and thinking, oh, when will it be their time? And I was a child. Why was I even programmed into thinking that? But I was. And Greg said the other day, you're never taught at school that there's an option not to have kids. It's always when you're a kid, when you're a dad, when you're a mom, when you have a kid, it'll be different, blah, blah, blah. And there's never a conversation that anyone has with you that says both things are a choice. You can do either. And so I don't know what the path looks like. And I don't know, there were friends of mine that I sort of thought weren't going to have kids that have at the last minute. And I'm like, there goes another one, because, I kind of thought at least I'd have you, on this island where I'm sitting. But so, yeah, I don't know. And we talk about it all the time. What will our life look like, and blah, blah, blah. And then we were talking about it this weekend, actually, because I was with my nephew, who I love very much, and I have such a nice time with him, but I'm always relieved to give him back. And we were talking, we've been together 7 years, and we were sort of looking back at the 7 years and thinking, there's never been a moment in those 7 years where having kids would have been better than what we were doing in that moment. You know, that kids wouldn't have enhanced that moment more than them. And we like each other. We have a nice time. We met, you know, a bit later in life, I guess, than the majority of couples. I'd already been divorced. And also I think there probably is an element of anxiety. For me, it feels like it sort of took away my late teens and 20s. And so I think probably there's a part of me that still feels 30, which is ridiculous to say, but I think there is a part of me that's surprised by the fact that I'm 41. And I think I can't be, you know, I missed that whole period. And so I think there's probably a bit of me that thinks, well, yeah, maybe I'd like to do that in another 10 years. But obviously then it's, you know, 51 and it's too late for me. Again, it's all up in the air. I don't know what the future looks like. I think it probably does look like it's just me and Greg. But yeah, I think it's maybe we are the first generation of what it will look like for women that aren't just called kind of spinsters or cat ladies. Although JD Vance said it last week, so it's, you know, it still happens. But maybe this is the generation of women that it looks different for, and that the stereotypes sort of lessens for. But it does feel like a frontier in a way, like into the future, that I don't know what it looks like, because I don't remember seeing it in a way that I would like to do it.
I often think, you know, for the generation of women older, I mean, I'm a bit older than you, older than me, having children was what you did. It was just what you did for, you know, our grandmothers, my mother's generation. On the whole, particularly if you were like an ordinary-ish person, mainly having children was just what you did. And by the time you got to my generation, it kind of didn't have to be in the same way. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of just agreeing really with you. But your mum met your dad later, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yeah. And I'm always fascinated by that, because she didn't have me until she was 39, I think, 38, 39. And she'd lived this whole life before me. You know, she was kind of my age almost, and, you know, before she kind of settled down. And I always thought that was so fascinating that she'd done so much in that sort of 20-year period after, you know, university. But she was very clear that she did want to have kids in some way. She knew that always, that somehow, either adoption or fostering or having her own children, she knew she wanted to do it somehow. So yeah, that was the difference, I guess, is that by now she definitely knew, you know, one way or another. But Lucy Worsley, you know, the historian, she said this interesting thing when she was asked about not having kids. She said, I've been educated out of it. And I thought that was so interesting that she, by the time she'd completed several layers of education that women maybe 6 years ago didn't have the opportunity to do, she thought, why would I be having children now? You know, I'm entering this sort of peak of my professional career and doing such interesting things. And now I see what it might look like to have children. Why would I do that? And I thought that was really interesting. You know, I, as a child, was never told that there was another option than having children. And it was only because I got so late into my 30s without having them that I thought, oh, I'm sort of doing it. I'm sort of living without children. So is this what it looks like? You know, it doesn't look sad or, you know, lonely. It looks really nice. So I think that's also a really interesting angle to it, which is, you know, if you don't have children at 38 or whatever, you're already living without kids, because most people have had kids, you know, 8, 9, 10 years before you. Greg made the mistake of saying, I don't know if it was in that interview, but he said to the interviewer, oh, we're still young, you know, we've got loads of time if we want to.
It was that interview, yeah.
And the Daily Mail picked up on that, and every comment was like, your wife is 38 years old. She is very old. She has no time at all to have children. And I was like, oh, why did you say that? Now it makes me sound like, you know, now they're discussing like whether I'm near the menopause. Like, why is this like in the Daily Mail? Like, oh.
Yeah, it's literally like you're prehistoric, isn't it?
I know, and especially to a Daily Mail commenter. You know, of course they think that. You know, God, Greg's married to this old crone. It's just like, oh, how undignified for these to be the comments. Oh.
Oh, God, no. I mean, again, I'll ask and you tell me to sod off, but you had a miscarriage in 2020. Did that impact how you felt about having children, do you think?
I think that was that kind of thing of, you know, we were kind of being quite laissez-faire about the whole thing. Like, oh, you know, we'll have them at some point, and just assuming we would, and then getting pregnant by mistake, and then having a miscarriage, and then thinking like, like we didn't think that through at all. You know, we would spend a lot more time thinking about, you know, what car to buy or what film to watch that night than we'd ever given consideration to having a kid. And also I think being pregnant at that point made me really anxious, and made me anxious. It kicked my OCD off. And I think the book was just about to come out. So I was thinking, oh, right. So the pinnacle of my life is about to happen professionally. And I'm just going to have a kid and it's going to ruin it all. And so, yeah, I think it made us both feel a bit more like chastened and a bit more like, oh, if we're going to do that again, we should do it because we want to do it. And since then, we've never kind of come to that decision. So yeah, it was helpful in a way because it made us think about it seriously, which we hadn't done before.
Tough, but useful.
It actually wasn't. It wasn't tough. I know people always say that, and that's of course understandable for other people who have those experiences. I'm not trying to take away from their experiences, but for me, it wasn't tough. And that's the same with my experience of abortion, like not tough. Like those things for me, I just think that it's important that there's also a narrative for women to know that like, those things aren't always life-changingly sad and awful. I think sometimes in some situations they are either the right thing or a relief or not. They don't go on to affect you long time.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because having not had children myself, I definitely went through a phase of feeling like the only right answer when you don't have children is to say that you can't have them.
Mm.
Because
that's really interesting.
Then you're kind of not judged. You're not selfish. You tried and failed,
Yeah. And it's also the same with the language around abortion, which, the Democrats always say, safe, legal and rare. And that the story is always about women that had no choice, that they had to have an abortion because there was a life-threatening illness or, and you think, no, sometimes you don't want to have children or it's not the right time for you to have children or, all of those answers are also acceptable, and I think even now the language is still kind of quite, it's still, I think it's still written in a kind of quite tame, flowery way, and I think it should just be, no, I don't want that. People say to women, no is a full answer. And I think I don't want that is also a full answer. I don't want to. I think no one is owed more than that.
I think it's like you were saying about the not being a top trumps of mental health, but it feels like there's also a top trumps when it comes to abortion and pregnancy. Like there are things that are considered more acceptable than other things.
Yeah, things that are considered palatable and things that aren't. Yeah, exactly. And it's the same. I think it's the same. Yeah, like the same with mental health, which is that I think anxiety, OCD, depression are sort of seen as more palatable than psychosis. Bipolar, schizophrenia, there are still things that we sort of seemingly understand and then things that we find too scary and don't want to talk about as much, things that might not elicit the same amount of sympathy. And it's rubbish, to put it bluntly.
I want to talk to you a little bit about rage because rage is such a big thing in How to Kill Your Family. And it's basically oozing from every female character in particular in What a Way to Go. Why?
Because I just feel really angry all the time. I do. And I think most women feel really angry all the time. I think, everything pisses me off and always has. And I guess writing fiction is such a good way of getting that out because it's completely fictional, supposedly all of it's fictional, and it's so cathartic. And you're not whining, you're not whining your little whiny rant about whatever because it's fiction, so it's entertainment. So hopefully it's entertaining. So you get to just let it all out. And I didn't know I was doing it. I had no, it wasn't deliberate. It's just it ended up being in there. And then there was a point where I realized what I was doing, and I thought, oh, I hope this doesn't sound preachy or kind of, it's tipped over into not being funny. But yeah, I couldn't help it. And even with the all the characters that I write mainly are quite dislikable. They're not really meant for you to kind of feel warmly towards. But even the female characters in What a Way to Go, I do feel some sympathy for all of them, even though I sort of recognize that I don't want to be friends with them or, have dinner with them. I feel sorry for them because I do feel like there's even if you're incredibly rich, you're still hemmed in by all of those things that women are hemmed in by. I think that's what I like writing. I think I like writing about the idea that money, even with all the money in the world, you're still hemmed in by the things that we're all hemmed in by. It doesn't change anything there. And in fact, I guess it can make it worse. So yeah, I think I feel angry and I'm trying to make it funny. is what I'm trying to do. That's cathartic for me.
Yeah, there's a comment, I think it's about Olivia, who is the corpse's wife, effectively, the listeners. And it's like you say, it's a mistake men often make, thinking their wives are stupid when they're actually full of rage. And I think that kind of whole swirling thing of women being underestimated and dismissed, like another character who's in her 80s, who the corpse just thinks is a mark. And I think that's really bubbling to the surface.
Yeah, I mean, also, how could you not be angry all the time? You see things like, things like Sarah Everard, obviously, was a few years ago, and Beba Smallman, who was, killed, and then the police took photographs of her body. And then there's, to other things like the Harrison Butker speech that went online about, women stay home and have babies, live your traditional lives. And then the ballerina farm profile that was not that long ago in the Times about, her husband basically making her have 9 children and giving up her ballet career. And every day there is something, right? That if you don't laugh, you would go mad, because you live in this world that is so obscene to women. And so, yeah, I mean, how could it not bubble over? And again, I get all of these 20-year-olds on TikTok, these 20-year-old women who are so angry, but kind of channeling it. And I'm kind of in awe. It's that thing of getting old where you look at the younger generation and think, wow, look at you. This is so great. You're going to save us, which is obviously a horrible thing to put on them. But yeah, how could you not be angry all the time?
It's really interesting, because for women of, your generation, my generation, the generation above, I think it's almost like we kind of almost are growing into our anger. Or it's like if they're able to harness it when they're 20, it's like anything could happen.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Because actually, I think you do grow into it. And I think also you struggle with a lot of internalized misogyny when you're in your teens, 20s, 30s. There's a lot of kind of, people call it, pick-meism. But actually what that is just women trying to kind of get along without being cast aside or hurt. And I think that there's another generation, maybe, that because they've grown up in a different world, and maybe because they have information online, easy access. I don't know what the reason is, but I can see that they do seem much less apologetic, much less, they do seem angry. And you know what? It's that thing that people say, old women, they get so angry old women. It's always that. And actually, maybe, yeah, the anger is just always in you, but it's just repressed early on, because you've got a strong survival instinct and you want to get through the world. And then when you hit 40 or 50, you think, oh, I don't care. Maybe it's not to do with just menopause or aging or whatever. Maybe it is just that everyone has a rage, and now people feel less bad about other people seeing it.
You're going to keep it inside for so long. Before I ask you questions, I always ask, just got one more. So I was just kind of like thinking about the kind of the timeline that we're all meant to adhere to. And it's like, I was thinking that I can't remember who put it this way, but I read online that you ended your 20s in tears, which I...
True, I did, yeah.
And you ended your 30s in the bestseller lists for 47 weeks.
Yeah.
So 40s, what does that feel like? What's it looking like?
I don't know. I mean, I was quite perturbed by turning 40. I had a big party because I thought you've got to go 2 feet in and be bold about it. But I was quite perturbed because, like I say, mentally, it doesn't feel that I'm 40, and that feels quite scary to me, because I think I can remember my dad turning 40 and me being 11. So for me, I'm like, that's grown up. That's kind of my image of what a grown up is, and that now I'm there. And now I've turned 41, which felt less fun than 40, because I thought 41 is not like an interesting, you can't have a party. I mean, you could, but so it feels weird and odd. And I'm wondering whether I'm going to be successful and enriched and, write more books and find this kind of, calling, cement that calling for me and all of those things. Or am I going to go and have several bad facelifts? And honest to God, I couldn't tell you which one it's going to be. It could be either, because I very strongly feel like I could go, I'm going to have 7 bad facelifts and become really interested in redesigning my bathroom. It could happen. I could see it happening. Or I could be more professionally fulfilled and, grow in confidence. And maybe there's a third way, as Tony Blair would say. But at the moment, both equally likely. Who knows? Because sometimes, I look at the face and I think, would it be so wrong? Would it be so bad?
I cannot see a wrinkle. Have you Botoxed?
No, I've never done anything. I'm too scared because I feel like,
me too.
Can you imagine if you got Botox and it killed you and then your obituary said she died of Botox?
She died of vanity.
And it'd just be humiliating. It would be so humiliating. There's that line in Clueless where Cher says, look at the picture of my mum. Wasn't she beautiful? She died during a routine facelift. And you think, oh, that would just be so humiliating. So I haven't done anything, but I do think it's one of those things where I think at some point it's going to happen. I'm going to start thinking about it. But yeah, so I haven't. I probably won't. I don't want to mess with myself. And I also don't want to be obsessed with the idea of beauty and attractiveness and youth and all of those things. But I do think it's hard to brush it off entirely. And I think it would be a lie for me to pretend that I don't find it slightly daunting. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, that's human, isn't it? I mean, there was a line in What a Way to Go that I wrote down that really gave me pause, though, because it basically, the vile dead main character basically saying, you don't want to be reminded of your slow decline by seeing it reflected in your partner's face. And I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to need some time to process that.
But I mean, hence why you see so many men with their second wives, because obviously it's about death, isn't it? It's about aging and decrepitude. And if you can be with a 30-year-old woman instead of a 65-year-old woman, then, you don't have to see it anymore, do you? I mean, everything is further away. You can stave it off.
And vice versa, of course.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
There's always another husband.
Listen, the hypocrite in me thinks that's completely fine. My husband is 2 years younger than me. And, I feel like I have the potential to go even younger. I could, I call him my current husband just to keep him on his toes.
Yeah. Right. Questions I always ask. What's your emotional age?
A therapist once talked to me about the parliament of selves, which is that in every single person, there is an entire parliament of people, and that all of them are you at different ages, and you're responding to things all the time throughout the day. So sometimes you'll respond as your 5-year-old self and then your 11-year-old self. And I found that so interesting.
Love that. Yeah.
Isn't it so good? And it's one of those things that I've never stopped thinking about. It comes to me all the time, and it helps me understand other people, because I think, okay, you are not acting as you, 38-year-old Greg. This is you, 14-year-old Greg. And I can see it in people, even in my mum and dad. I can see, okay, there's another part of you taken over. So I think most of the time in my head, I'm 17 and I'm wanting an adult to take control.
Give us a book recommendation.
Recently, I just finished Taffy Brodnasser Acker, and I'm sure I pronounced her name.
Brodnasser Acker.
Thank you very much. I just read Long Island Compromise, which took me a while to get into, but I really liked in the end. And I also just finished, it's a book called La Serenissima, which is about the history of Venice, which starts 2,000 years ago. And it's a bit meaty in the beginning, because you're thinking, why do I care about these, tiny wooden stilt boats and stuff? And then it gets so good. And I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I loved it.
What advice would you give younger women?
Oh God, stop apologizing, and it's okay not to be likable. You don't have to be likable.
You've managed to follow that advice yourself.
Well, lots of people don't like me, so clearly that has been successful in some way, but not deliberately.
Who's your old bird role model?
Oh, there are so many. I think, the one that I really always think of a lot is Anita Lasker-Valfish, who was a Holocaust survivor who was a women's orchestra member at Auschwitz, and she played the cello. Yeah, she played the cello, and there's a fantastic documentary about her. And she's been old for a long time now, and she's just fantastic. She smokes cigarettes and is incredibly unsentimental and sort of slightly snarky and rude and brilliant. And every time I read about her or see anything about her, I just think she just looks like the most magnificent old bird. Although maybe I shouldn't call her that, be a bit more respectful, but she's amazing.
I think it's very respectful. What's your superpower?
Oh God. My superpower is a very pathetic one. It's when I'm running, I can tell exactly how many seconds I've done before I look at my phone to see how many seconds I've done. I know exactly how many seconds, because I think I'm always waiting to the end. So my brain now has an internal running clock. And if it's 37 seconds, I will know it's 37 seconds. I bet you some people say really interesting ones, and that's mine.
No, they're just that's massively varied. I suppose I want you to tell me that everybody will eventually go through the pain barrier. And if you start running, it will You will get to a point where you're not counting every 37 seconds.
Yeah, no, you do. But I think the thing about running is you think you're going to get through the pain barrier and then it's going to be smooth sailing. And again, like all those life lessons that I keep forgetting, actually that's not what happens. You don't get there and then you're floating. What happens is that you will have 8 runs in a row that feel really difficult and that you're thinking, oh, is it 37 seconds yet? Is it 38 seconds? And then out of the blue, one day you, Sam, will be running down Portobello Beach and you will suddenly get this like whiz. Your whole body starts tingling and you feel like you're being transported to like another plane, and it's the runner's high, and it's the most incredible feeling in the whole world.
I need to hear that you get it every time though.
No, I know you don't. I know. Otherwise, everyone would run, though, right? Otherwise, the whole world would be running all the time.
Last one. How many fucks do you give?
Have you seen that brilliant cross stitch which says, "Behold my field, which is devoid of all fucks," or whatever it is? I've misquoted it, and I love that. It's very funny. But I would say I give way too many fucks. Way too many, like a troubling amount.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.